Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. I am so excited to be talking with Dr. Julie Shaw. Hello, how are you?
Hello. I'm good. I'm glad that we got this on the calendar and we get to do this and have more conversations.
I know we had a great conversation like about a week and a half ago, and I'm like, oh, why don't we just record these right out the shoot? Because I felt like I found my sister. We had such a really inspirational conversation about a topic. We're going to dive into a topic that's maybe not always that easy to talk about.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Julie is a grief educator and coach. She helps people say hello to grief and rediscover who they are because of it. I just love that second half of it because I feel like sometimes we don't talk about this. And second of all, there really isn't anyone walking on this planet who hasn't experienced grief in some capacity or one capacity or another. Do you agree?
Yeah. Or yet. You know?
Or
Like yeah.
or yet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like if we're living a life, it's got love, it's got joy, but it also has loss and grief at it's just part of life. And I don't say that to minimize it, but I say that as, there is a collective around this that most of us can relate to it in some capacity or not. And let's just kick this off by, we're going to go right into the grief part of this, but could you maybe tell me a time that you felt the most seen or heard during a season of grief?
Oh, very good question. Seen or heard. I feel like I have a few and I'm
Sure.
trying to, and I guess I'm going with the one that keeps on coming back up. I will give credit to one of my friends, and we had gone on a vacation. We did like a friend's vacation, and we were out at dinner. And she just asked me the question. She said, how's your grief going? And I can't remember how far into my own grief journey that I was in with the timing. But what I do remember is it was enough timing to where I knew that it wasn't fresh. It wasn't, and we'll probably get into this, but my whole grief journey really started when my sister died in 2020. And that was a tremendous loss for me. And so I know it was enough time where people had stopped checking in. And so this was and I could tell she was fumbling, kind of like, how do I even ask this question? How do I
Right.
but even something like that, right? How is your grief going? Um, I was like, yeah. And I was able to talk about it and I was able to just in that moment, I think it just really struck me
Mm,
to be like, oh, like you're thinking about this too. You remember, like, and care that
and share.
that you
Yes.
actually care enough
Yes.
to ask and push through the fear and uncomfortable feelings to ask
Yes.
me.
And really, in such a simple way, still acknowledge that, there isn't an end date on grief.
Yes,
There's
absolutely.
not, there's not. And the journey will be different for everyone. But I know in my own life for grief, even just being, someone acknowledging like we're still in a grief cycle here, just being able to, even if it's messy and ugly and awkward, I'd rather the question be asked than swept under the rug and pretend it's not happening.
For sure, for sure. And I think those questions are what people are afraid of. It's fear, because it really comes from a fear of the impact they're going to have on that person and understanding that that person's probably thinking about it too, or they're probably having these own internal conversations and asking themselves questions about their own grief. And so for somebody outside, external to ask you, right? It allows you to process more. It allows you to connect
Mhm.
and it also allows other people to learn. And so I
Yes.
think even you're doing a service to yourself if you are somebody listening that is like, well, how do I even have this conversation or how do I check in? I think a lot of things are going to feel uncomfortable. And the more that you stretch yourself and try to do that, that's going to help you too.
Yes. Agreed. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. So let's dive a little bit into the arc and your personal journey. You touched on it a little bit, but maybe could you share a little more about navigating the grief of losing your sister?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are like, how did you even get into this work? And I'm like, my sister died. And so it's like, and it's so funny because I can like say that with a smile now, which might be like awkward for people, but it's
Yeah.
where I'm at.
Yeah.
And it's the reality that I have accepted. And so, and it's the truth. And so it really it started there back in 2020, and a lot was happening in 2020 in itself.
Right.
And so my sister died from lupus, and she had been diagnosed when she was 16, but it was, and she's my older sister. It was my older sister. And so it was something that I think growing up, we knew she dealt with, but maybe not to the extent. And I also think my parents maybe were protecting me or felt like they were protecting me from this.
Hmm.
So if you're listening, I do encourage you to have open dialogues with people in your family or support systems because it can help, especially if it is something that is a long-term illness or anything that somebody's dealing with for a long amount of time. And so, you know, people with lupus, they can live long lives. I do think, and my sister was a nurse practitioner. She was in the medical field. So I do also think there was parts of her that was protecting us and maybe even protecting me to where we may not have known the full extent of her diagnosis and how it was affecting her.
Hmm.
And I think also we kind of we truly don't really understand because we aren't living in that person's body or in that
Right.
person's experience. And so, and if you haven't been confronted with death in particular, like time can be something, oh, I know this may happen, but we're also still living our lives. And it's, I don't know, I don't know what this is coming up for me to try to explain, but I'm just trying to explain that feeling. And maybe those people that understand this, it resonates. But just, I knew my sister might not live a long life. However, I don't know if you really understand that and really can take that. And maybe some people do, right? Um,
Yeah, and I can relate to this. I mean, we're for many of the listeners know the journey we're walking with my oldest child in a rare disease and a
yeah,
disease that's um, inflicting a lot of suffering and hardship and we know what the end result is.
yeah,
And it's you're always living with we know we don't have infinite time,
yes,
but we also don't know how much time.
exactly.
And so it is a difficult and I really call that sort of a grief circle that we live
Yeah,
in being like, okay, you know, the rest of us just think, oh, we'll be here for a longer time, but no one really knows at the end of the day. And I think it is a difficult thing to wrap your head around. And
it is.
and I think to be honest, it's even harder to have the conversations around it.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
that's where I think it can be very lonely
Mm-hmm.
in that aspect of grief
Yeah.
because it's really difficult to put yourself in their shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there, see, this is where we're getting into conversation because I feel like I totally veered off from the question. But but it's just like, and I know you get this from our previous conversation, but even just how you live your life, right?
Yeah.
Like people in our lives were given these diagnoses, but we're also still living our life. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of people will say, live each day like it's your last. Or for the people in our lives, we were trying to live each day like it was their last, right? And so, what do we do with that? How do we hold that? Because there's a lot of grief in that. And to name it specifically, it's anticipatory grief. So,
Mm-hmm.
even educating for those listening, this was something I didn't learn until after my sister died. I really would have loved to have even had that knowledge of what anticipatory grief is, because I think there was power in naming it and understanding what I was going through so that I could have better prepared.
Right.
Because it was me anticipating this, but sometimes that's conflicting for people because they're like, well, they're still here. So I don't have permission to grieve. And
Right.
I I shouldn't be processing like she's dead, right? Because she's still here.
Right.
But in a way, like, and I think that's why I want people to understand grief isn't just about the death. There's grief in everything. And even that preparation, there's grief in that. Um, so I guess I can like back to the story in my arc is what like got me into this is that yes, my sister died. And I think yes, like I explained, there were lots of things that I did not know.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to seek out all that information because I did not want to get stuck in my grief. And I could feel and I felt like I understood that people can and it can halt them in ways. And I'm a former professional athlete. I feel like I'm a very driven person and a high performer, and that was just not me. And so I needed to learn and I needed to figure things out, which then led me to becoming certified as a grief educator. I've been a professor in my past, so education is my thing. I am not a licensed therapist, but I do have this ability to, and in my athletic career, I was an athletics coach. So I feel like I've just been coaching people, teaching people. That's my thing.
Yeah, it
And to be
comes
able to
naturally.
help people move through that while
Yeah.
also being able to give them the knowledge. And I think that's where that second half comes in, right? Is when you're saying rediscover who you are because of it,
Yes.
is because a lot of people will think or tell me, oh, I wanna go back to who I was before. And in the most bluntest way possible, I'm like, I'm sorry, you will
Don't go
not.
back. No, there's no going back.
No, no. And so I think we're given an opportunity and a choice, right? Once we
Mm-hmm.
can say hello to our grief, once we can acknowledge it, which is the hardest step, when you see it, you can't unsee it. When you know it, you can't unknow it. And so now what do you do with that? What
Yes.
choices do you have to continue to move forward, rediscover who you are, reimagine who you can be? And yes, hold on to pieces, but
Yes.
understanding we're still continuing to grow and change and evolve as humans. So, how can we take this grief, let it alchemize us in the best way possible? And that can be
Mm-hmm.
hard for people, especially if they're at this like very beginning stage, especially if it is a death. But I would like to encourage people, yeah, just to invite that grief in and
Mm-hmm.
to see what it can, you know, alchemize you and change in you. And I'll say one more thing,
Yeah.
is in that arc, because when I'm talking about how it can benefit you, is the grief from my sister and being able to understand that then actually helped me on my next grief journey, which was my experience with infertility and not being able to carry a child and going through IVF and all of that, to where I was able to draw the parallels and then able to understand and feel and acknowledge that, like, you are grieving this now. And of course, it was compounded by the loss of my sister,
Yes.
but
Yes.
but that grief was this catalyst for me being able to have the capacity to hold and the capacity to release and like express and process that grief.
And I think, thank you for sharing this, your story. I think a lot of times we don't always appreciate that it doesn't have to just be a death. It
Mm-mm.
can be some kind of loss, not just loss of life, that, that that where grief appears and it rears its head. And I think there's a lot of times where we don't even, I think like being able to name it is like so key and also so scary for so many, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that is where for me, like there was so much relief in being able to name it.
Mm.
When we could just name what it actually like, when you finally found the language about how something felt, being able to name it actually started to create that foundation of moving forward in this new normal or whatever it is moving
Yeah.
forward. And the two experiences of loss, how and you said that losing your sister kind of prepared you for the loss of going through infertility, but the infertility is a loss that reoccurs.
Mm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
not,
Hmm.
it isn't like a one time one and
Yeah.
done. Like,
Yeah.
how did you navigate that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say it like that, right? Because there's a lot of grief, that can continuously reoccur. Um, and I think it kind of manifests in different ways
Hmm.
because yeah, and I'm just thinking of the layers of it, right? I think even now, it's like I'm very lucky. We do have two kids now. My wife was able to carry for us, and I think even that there was a lot of grief because if you think about it, like I'm living with my biggest like activator. Another educational piece is I don't use the word triggers just because of gun violence, and I know that in itself can be something. And I use the word activates, can activate grief for someone or activate some different emotions for them. So I swap those words out.
I
Uh,
like that.
and so I was activated a lot because,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
I'm watching these children grow,
yeah.
right? That's the constant reminder. Um, and so there was a lot of work that I had to do to be able to do that. And yes, there were absolutely times, and I was happy to find community in this and share my story or ask people questions that had gone through it too, because I thought again I was alone in it, or oh my gosh, I'm thinking horrible thoughts. Like it was very hard for me to touch her stomach, right? And oftentimes you think, oh, that's like what you see in the movies, and people are always reaching out to like touch pregnant bellies when they should definitely ask for consent first. But like,
Agreed.
but and it's like there were those parts, but it really is about how I prepared myself, how I really leaned into it. And even still to this day, I'm in mom group chats or neighborhood chats, and friends will talk about like their breastfeeding issues or things like that. And I'm just sitting there like, okay, yeah, like I will never know what it's like to birth a child. I can never like empathize with you to that level. And I think there are still those bits and pieces of grief that like shows itself there
Yeah,
and that I can acknowledge and let pass through and feel and validate and like be able to continue on.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Such a um there's so many pieces, no matter what kind of grief, that really we can all connect on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So let's skip a little to the hive. You talked a little bit about it, about community,
Mhm.
and I think you we need community in grief. Um, can you give me an example of maybe how you've been able to how you built your community based on
Yeah.
grief?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I give myself grace on like how it changes because, it's like when I originally started, I was like, okay, it's just going to be about death. And then,
Yeah.
and then it's understanding that there were so many, again, the layers to it and different types of it and how people are recognizing it in their life or how I even continue to, right? Like I'm currently writing a book on the grief of motherhood and understanding how my second child really, I always describe it like just broke me open in another way that I didn't expect, but at least I know I'm like, well, that's grief. So now I can deal with this. Um, But I think building my community really stemmed from my own process and how I saw the value of it. Because again, I did not want to get stuck in it. So I sought out a therapist. I sought out a group. Somebody had recommended a group here in Los Angeles at our house, and it was very specific. So what I loved is how very specific it was
Mhm.
because I was navigating my grief and my loss with other people who had also experienced the death of a sibling within a year. So we were all like in that
Oh,
first year
very. Mhm.
together. So that's also something if people are looking for community, like how niche down can you get? Because there are different forms of grief groups, grief communities to be a part of, and that one really, I was very grateful for that. And I've seen both work, and I've facilitated different groups with many different kinds of grief, and that's worked too. And so now it's very interesting because I've done it through events, whether it's virtual events, whether it's community events. Like I have a dance movement therapy event coming up here at the end of August here in LA. And it's that one's going to be interesting too, because I also don't want grief to be looked at as all sad all the time, because it is filled with so many different emotions, and there are absolutely like bright and light emotions there too.
Mhm.
That I want to just simply give people different avenues to process and invite them in and to be able to process in as many different ways as they can because I know there's not just one way. So I think
Right.
that's also how I've been able to build community is like showing them that there's so many different ways to do it. And then through educational pieces as well. But now I've actually been exploring, especially going back to that niche, is I've been in community in other communities with very high performing women, such as myself, right? So it kind of makes sense. And I've been able to ask them questions and think about how are you as a high performing woman handling grief and navigating grief? Because you are this type of woman, this type of person that obviously got to this certain level, is very goal oriented, very driven. Um, and so when I'm amongst these women, it's been very interesting to see how grief has influenced them in their lives. And so now it's about creating community about around this
Right.
is how am I helping even specifically high performing women and high performing in any way you want to categorize
Right.
that, right?
Mhm.
And be able to help them again goes back to that rediscover who they are because I think grief will change you in a way that it can also wake you up to be like I've been working this corporate job for 20 years and now I have this experience and guess what? No, this is not for me and I'm about to change my life, right?
That was me.
Yeah. See? Exactly. Probably because I'm hanging out with people like you.
Right? Because it does. It's like, hold on a second, like hard stop. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how do we want to continue? Whatever this journey is going to look like.
Yeah.
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 Do you do you find when in community, I've always believed we heal in community.
Yes, I say the same thing. Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
We don't heal alone behind our computer. And you can be on a Zoom call. I'm not saying virtual is not an option, but there really is something magical about being in community with others who are going through the same thing.
Yes.
Because again, as much as we try to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, if we haven't had that experience, we can only really imagine. We can't actually feel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What do you think? What's the magic that happens in that? What do you think,
Yeah.
really sparks that healing process?
So I think this is a really good question. I think that I would love to also challenge people listening to ask the question, what truly is community? Because I do think that community is starting to become a buzzword that's being thrown around.
I agree.
And you're like, yes. And I think even when you think about your friendships,
Mhm.
right, versus a community, I think I would love for people listening to reevaluate this because We can say, I have friends. That's community, right? I'm not saying get rid of all your friends, but maybe you do. Maybe you need to get rid of some of them. I don't know. And that there's grief in that too, where we have to step away from some friendships.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess where I'm going here is how you define community. Because community can say like, hey, I did like go meet up with these women or with these people, and like that was cool. I feel like that's community. However, I would like community to be taken a step further. How do we stay connected? How do you show up when I'm having hard times? How do you show up, months later? How do you, if I have a financial need, how can you help support me? Or how do we grow together? How do we make this commitment that, like, if you are in my community, that we are going to help lift each other up? And so, and I think that's why I said, like, take a look at your friendships. Are they just your friends or are they really like your community of friends?
Right.
Right?
Yes. And that's different.
Yeah.
A
It's
different
very,
layer. It's a different layer to community. And I think also, how are you showing up in community is another
yeah.
question you need to ask, right? Community doesn't work. It like
If
we
you
can all
don't.
sit beside each other, yeah, and say
Yeah.
it's community, but if we're really going to take care of each other and we really are going to come together for the greater good of both of us or
Yeah.
all of us, it's not just who's in that group, but how are you showing up in that group? And that's where I think with community getting thrown around these days like crazy, it's getting
Yeah.
lost a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, how are you? And I think that's what it is. It's like that's support and that's like doing life with people. I think even, and I think that perspective has changed even how I engage with my friends because
Mm.
um I do want to add value to their life as well. And I think it's also even saying like, hey, you might not hear from me like for a week, a month, but like I am going to check in. I've started using like voice notes just so
Yeah.
that those people that I like think of that I don't keep on communicating with, I just let them know like I'm still here. I still care
Mhm.
about you. And like please, like if you need anything and if I'm able to support you, please do not be afraid to ask or being able to just offer them different things, right? Or even talking. I just went to this other conference this past weekend with a couple of friends and we have a group chat. We're like making these commitments, like how we're going to show up like in these next 100 days. What are our goals? All these different things. And to where it's like there's also an accountability piece. Like how can your community also hold you accountable?
Mhm.
And, not that it's like super strict, like, oh, if you don't do this, you're kicked out,
Yes.
but it's just
No.
like, okay, we're gonna have our falls, we're gonna pick each other up and then, but it's like really understanding and getting like, I think this also speaks to your boundaries and like what you want
I agree.
out of life, especially if we're talking about the grief in our life. Because I think it's same, a lot of people have even brought up like divorce and like how grief is in divorce, and that can like rock your whole world. And so, again, there's just so many different types of ways people are grieving. And if we're still here on this earth trying to live this life, like, not to be cliche, but like, what's the best life you want to live?
Yes. And
Yeah.
that requires us to show up.
Yeah.
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 I want to just quickly circle back to something you said about community and reminding us that even though we are experience grief, we can still be experiencing joy and
Yeah.
love at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's part of living.
Hmm.
And it's sometimes hard to imagine how can I have both?
Yeah.
And really, you could have actually many of them all at once, feelings and experiences at the same time. And it doesn't diminish grief,
No. No.
not at
It's still gonna
all.
be there. It's still gonna be
Oh,
there. Yeah. Like it's okay. Don't worry if you're worried about that.
yeah, no, but that it doesn't diminish that you didn't love someone or didn't care someone because you're still feeling joy. And I think I just think this is, grief is such an important topic to talk about and not just be, happening behind closed doors. And that, again, we can all learn from each other's experiences. And again, how can we support one another
Yeah.
through these tough times
Yeah.
that someone is going through, and to continue to show up and, just be there.
Yeah. Because I think when you were talking, it made me even think about with all those emotions is one, I would want listeners to try not to label your emotions as good or bad or as positive or negative. Let them just be emotions. Let them just be emotions because that's what they are. And those emotions can be data for you. They can give you information. They can start to like bring you more clarity. And you can ask those emotions questions. And because I think when we start placing them in this good or bad pile, then that's when we start building the shame and the guilt and the regrets. And so just acknowledging it, especially like sometimes people are just doing what they need to do to survive in that moment.
Right. Yep.
And and even in that survival, like you said, like there can still be joys, there can still be happy moments, and we also don't need to push those away. Because I do think reflecting on my own experience, I can absolutely remember there were times when I said, it's kind of weird. I feel like I want to stay so close to my grief and be in such the depths of it because that kept me close to my sister.
Mhm.
And so it's like I wanted to feel all of it. I wanted to feel all the pain and I wanted to feel all of that because
Mhm.
then that meant that like she was still close to me and it was still that fresh that I felt that way.
Mhm.
And then, and people will go through this. And again, I'm speaking of death in particular, but it can relate to other types of grief or experiences with grief. Is then when I started to feel those moments of when I laughed or when I wanted to go out, because I'm a pretty social person. I was like, I want to have fun and I want to dance and I want to do all these things. And to give yourself permission to do those things while still carrying your grief there with you, like exactly what you're saying, like that's okay.
Mhm.
um, because I often say that grief will crack you open and it's kind of like this universe thing like where this and I've heard somebody else on my podcast talk about it like it's a portal. It's a portal to like and for me when they said that, yeah, it was a portal to every single emotion that like we can experience in this world in this lifetime where I just felt this like rushing in of like and how you're talking about naming it. I don't know the name of this, but I feel it.
Yeah,
And
and
yeah,
intensely. Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of talking about grief.
yeah.
I challenge you listeners to, head over. Dr. Julie's got a podcast called Hello I'm Grieving. You can find, she's a great resource. And I think it's just finding your people who can help you navigate this time. And please don't ever think that you have to do it alone. And today I just challenge our listeners to reflect a little and ask yourself, what grief are you holding today? And what might happen if you said hello to it?
Yeah. Yeah.
What could happen? Um, Thank you so much, Julie, for joining me on this podcast today. I think this was, again, a great conversation about, the connection that grief is personal, but it's also healing in a collective, and
Mm.
that we don't have to do it alone. We're going to leave all your contact info in the notes below. Please reach out. Please follow her. She is a great, great resource. And you need to connect. We do not
Yeah.
need to do this alone. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. I'd love to say hello. And yeah, pretty much every single social handle website is all at Hello I'm Grieving. So I look forward to it.
thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.